OK, Maurice. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Sadly, we've run out of time this morning. That's Maurice Liu, Deputy Chairman of Sinopac Futures in Taipei. Just before I go, the Nikkei is down 42 points. Australia is down 8 points at the moment. And Brent crude oil is trading at $34.23 a barrel. The weather forecast for today, mainly fine, cool in the morning. The maximum temperature will be about 21 degrees during the day. Moderate east to northeasterly winds, fresh at times. And it's going to be mainly fine tomorrow, cloudier over the weekend. The temperature right now is 18 degrees centigrade. The relative humidity is 80%. It's 8:30. Samantha Butler has the half-hour news.
The United Nations Security Council says it'll immediately work on new measures against North Korea for carrying out a further nuclear test, the fourth since 2006. Pyongyang says it exploded its first hydrogen bomb, but America has joined nuclear experts in questioning whether the blast was large enough for such a test. White House spokesman Josh Earnest says North Korea's isolation will deepen if it continues with its provocative actions.
There's nothing that's occurred in the last 24 hours that has caused the United States government to change our assessment of North Korea's technical and military capabilities. Now, I hasten to add that we're continuing the work necessary to learn more about the nuclear test that North Korea conducted last night.
Beijing says it firmly opposes the purported hydrogen bomb test and is monitoring the environment along China's border with North Korea. The Governor of California, Jerry Brown, has declared a state of emergency in response to a major methane gas leak that's forced thousands of people from their homes on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The BBC's Peter Bowes reports from LA.
The natural gas leak has been going on since October. It stems from a vast underground storage field in Porter Ranch on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Local people have complained about headaches, nausea, vomiting and dizziness, although health officials have said the gas is not toxic. According to the Southern California Gas Company, which owns the storage facility, the leak has been traced to a steel pipeline more than 1,000 metres under the ground.
The World Bank says there'll be global economic growth this year, but has forecast that it will be modest and held back by weakness in many emerging economies. Francisca Onsoga is one of the authors of the World Bank report.
This is the key risk to global growth in 2016, in our view, that a number of emerging markets, not just one, but a number of large emerging markets, slow at the same time. And we estimate, for example, that a 1 percentage point decline in BRICS growth will slow growth in other emerging markets by 0.8 percentage points and possibly global growth by 0.4 percentage point.
You're listening to the news on RTHK.
Good morning and welcome to Backchat. I'm Danny Gittings. Your co-host this morning is Ada Wong. Good morning, Ada.
Good morning, Danny.
In our main topic this morning, we'll be looking at the ramifications of the continuing mystery over the disappearance of controversial bookseller Li Bo, who vanished from Hong Kong last week following the disappearance of 4 of his publishing associates in recent months. Mr. Li now appears to be on the mainland, according to a letter purportedly written by him, which says he's insisting an investigation that may take some time. But it's still a mystery how he ended up on the mainland, since authorities say there's no record of him leaving Hong Kong through legal channels. And a series of fiery commentaries in the mainland newspaper saying Chinese authorities have every right to take action against Mr. Li because of his publication of books about the communist leadership has heightened suspicions that mainland security personnel may have played some part in his disappearance from Hong Kong. As the mystery continues, the political ramifications are already beginning to be felt. Beijing has rejected expressions of concern from London, which says Mr. Li holds a British passport, but Beijing says the missing publisher should be treated as a Chinese citizen. Meanwhile, there are suggestions that the accusations of possible mainland involvement in Mr. Li's disappearance will complicate the government's apparent plan to allow mainland officials to be stationed in West Kowloon as part of a joint checkpoint for the new cross-border express rail link. And some local bookstores appear to have begun withdrawing Mr. Li's books from sale, apparently for fear of possible repercussions. So what do you think will be the ramifications of the saga over Mr. Li's disappearance? Will it change the way we view one country, two systems? Or will the whole issue be forgotten in a few weeks' time? Email us with your thoughts. Our email address, backchat@rthk.hk. That's backchat@rthk.hk. Or you can go to our Facebook page, Backchat on RTHK Radio 3, and leave a comment there. And later in the programme, we'll be looking at North Korea's latest nuclear test. Joining us for the first segment of the discussion, we have Kevin Yam, who is a member of the Progressive Lawyers Group. We have Willie Lam, who's an adjunct professor at the Centre for China Studies at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And we'll also be joined by other guests shortly. Let's go to Willie Lam first. Willie Lam, good morning.
Hello.
Hi, Willie Lam.
No, Lawrence. Yeah.
Okay, well, sorry. Let me introduce Lawrence Ma. Also, Lawrence Ma, barrister and chairman of China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation, and a regular guest on this programme. Mr. Ma, thank you for joining us again on the show.
Thank you. Good morning, Danny.
Now, do you understand the good morning? Do you understand the concerns that have been expressed in Hong Kong over what has happened to Li Bo?
Yes. I understand that the public is pretty concerned about cross-border enforcement. What I'll be saying is it would be too risky, both politically and legally, for mainland police officers to come over here and actually kidnap somebody, possibly at gunpoint, to smuggle them into a car and then go on to a speedboat and smuggle him into the mainland. Because those police officers would, in this operation, could be easily exposed. For example, if the car was intercepted by the police, for example, because of regular checks of drink driving or speeding, or for example, they will be intercepted by marine police at the speedboat when the speedboat is crossing over. These sort of police officers would not be immune from prosecution, and they would not have any right to execute or enforce any law here. They would be charged, they would be arrested, they would be charged, they would be brought to court, they would be brought to court for justice. So facing that sort of dire consequences, I do not think that the mainland police or the head of it would make a decision to send their subordinates to Hong Kong to actually kidnap somebody.
Hang on, you just said the mainland police or the head of it. Are you sort of suggesting maybe it's an unauthorized operation or something like that, or that?
No, I'm just saying that these sort of operations would not be possible, and it would not be practicable because of the dire consequences that the public security ministry or department would face.
Could I join in for a moment?
Okay, this is Willie Lam.
The decision to deal a devastating blow to this Causeway Bay bookstore publishing house was made at the very top of the party leadership. As I understand it, the Xi Jinping administration came out with an instruction early 2015 to, in fact, silence and eradicate the 4 or 5 publishers in Hong Kong, which they consider to be stirring up trouble and smearing the leadership and so forth. So the orders came from the very top of the party state apparatus. And as for the exact way in which Mr. Li Bo was made to disappear and then showed up again in Shenzhen, there have been various precedents of this happening, mainly through maritime routes. That means speedboats and so forth. So the fact that the Hong Kong immigration authorities did not have Mr. Li Bo's exit record shows that some surreptitious methods, which, however, have been effectively used before.
Okay, Willie Lam, let's just
by mainland agents operating in Hong Kong.
Let's just clarify that, because what you said is very important. You are saying that there was a decision from the highest level of the Chinese leadership last year that to target the Causeway Bay bookshop and to be
similar publishers in Hong Kong, which put out these books about political intrigue in Beijing and so forth.
And how certain can you be about that? Because obviously there are a lot of rumours around, and why has it taken basically a year or so for this to emerge?
Well, certainly I got it from Chinese sources in Beijing and Shanghai, and you can see this very clearly with the Mighty Current, that means the publisher behind Causeway Bay bookstore, and the fact that, the instruction does not target only publishers, but the Hong Kong media in general. So we have seen in the past 1-2 years expedited attempts by mainland Chinese companies to acquire Hong Kong media and so forth. So this is a full-fledged operation to control the publishing and media companies in Hong Kong, particularly those which are seen as not very friendly with China.
So are you saying, according to what you've heard, that mainland security personnel would definitely have been behind the disappearance of Li Bo then, Willie Lam?
There is no shadow of a doubt. And of course, if we look at the way the major owner of Mighty Current, that means Mr. Gui Minhai, who was abducted by state security agents in Pattaya, Thailand, and then smuggled back to China. In fact, the CCTV in the apartment building where Mr. Gui lives in Pattaya recorded the images of the 4 state security agents. So that was a very unsubtle abduction attempt. But now I think whoever were responsible for abducting Mr. Li, I think they took the lesson from the abduction case in Thailand, and that's why there was no footprint. They didn't show up on the CCTV footages of the warehouse where Mr. Li Bo was taken away.
And let's be clear on this. You don't know exactly how he disappeared, but you suspect he disappeared through, as you were saying earlier, maritime channels, that somehow he was taken on a boat across the border.
Either maritime channels or through the usual channels. Well, you have to remember that since 1997, PLA vehicles, PLA cars, or PLA other PLA vehicles or cars with PLA license plates, they could come and go without any protocol measures through the Hong Kong-Shenzhen border. So Mr. Li could have been put within the PLA vehicle, or there could have been a new practice whereby certain public security cars could come and go without inspection through the border. And this is what the Civil Island Administration has to clarify, whether in the past few years this new practice has come into play. But certainly, PLA vehicles will come and go without any checking through the immigration and border controls.
Okay, we're discussing the disappearance of bookseller Li Bo. You just heard Willie Lam, a adjunct professor at the Centre for China Studies, Chinese University of Hong Kong, saying that according to his understanding, mainland security personnel were definitely involved in the disappearance of Li Bo. We also have as guests Lawrence Ma, barrister and chairman of China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation, and Kevin Yam, member of the Progressive Lawyers Group. If you have any comments, do email us at backchat@rthk.hk, or you can go to our Facebook page, Backchat on RTHK Radio Free, and comment there.
But Willie Lam, I just want to go a bit further. It is said that Mr. Li Bo holds a British passport. Now, would this complicate things or not?
Well, definitely. But we have to remember that China at this stage is still not a country with rule of law, so they could interpret the Chinese laws regarding nationalities whichever way they want. And it is also the case that Mr. Li Bo, he has been known to use the home return permit to visit China, of course, up to about 4 or 5 years ago when he practically stopped visiting China. So once Li Bo or any other person with a British passport or even with an Australian or a Canadian passport, they are within China, then the Chinese authorities, they could interpret nationalities laws whichever way they like to justify the assertion that, as Foreign Minister Wang Yi said the other day, that that particular ethnic Chinese person is first and foremost a Chinese, despite their having a British passport in their pocket. So the major problem is that there is no rule of law in China, and laws, including laws regarding nationalities, could be interpreted in a flexible manner.
Willie Lam, do you yourself know Li Bo?
No, but I know a couple of people working for the Mighty Current publishers, right?
Okay, we have several other guests. Let's bring in James Toe, legislator from the Democratic Party, who's just joined us on the line. Mr. Toe, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, I'm not sure if you heard just now, but Willie Lamb, before you joined us, was saying that his understanding was that the disappearance of Li Bo is the result of a direct instruction from the highest levels of the Chinese leadership.
Well, I have no information to
your reaction to that?
Yeah, well, of course, I would say I'm very concerned with the disappearance of Mr. Li Bo. In particular, Li Bo's fact that he leave Hong Kong in his own way and to assist some investigation. But I'm puzzled that because we have one country, two system, how can Li Bo's on the face of it, the act publishing certain books legally would attract a certain investigation which warrant his risking his life to leave Hong Kong in an irregular way. So that was a very serious event. And I am concerned whether he is kidnapped or being assisted to leave Hong Kong bypassing the immigration control. I think that is in an illegal way. Yeah.
What are your priorities in investigating how this might have happened? Willie Lamb mentioned both the possibilities of being smuggled maritime route or crossing the border in a PLA vehicle. Are those possibilities you'd want to investigate?
Well, my primary concern now is to ensure the safety of Li Bo first. And according to the mutual notification system between Hong Kong and mainland, I think they should help to check if Li Bo has been officially detained. And if not, then of course we would ask them to help to save him. Well, in respect of Li Bo's partner, the four partners, I think they have been found disappeared for almost 2 months. And I would say, according to the mechanism, I think it seems that it's too late to even have an answer back from the mainland. I would say the mainland authority must act diligently and to confirm the whereabouts and the safety of those 5 persons.
James, the wife of Mr. Li Bo has already withdrawn her request for police help. So in these situations, the Hong Kong police can't do anything, or they have not been very, very straightforward about this whole case.
No. First, because there will be a certain route by which Li Bo leave Hong Kong in his own way. So at least the Hong Kong police must utilize their resources or use more resources to find out the route. Well, of course, they are now using the missing person unit. I think that is not a prime unit in the police force. They should use more resources to check all the possible data, video clips, to see if Li Bo leave alone or accompanied by a certain person, or even forcibly detained by a certain person and kidnapped away. I think that is within our own jurisdiction, so we must investigate them. If we can find any certain video clips to find certain faces, we would put those clips to the main authority to help to assist them to help to locate Li Bo and those other person accompany him.
Okay, let's bring in Kevin Yam from the Progressive Lawyers Group, who's been waiting patiently in our Queensway studio. Good morning, Mr. Yam.
Good morning.
How concerned are you about these latest developments, and particularly what we heard from Willie Lamb saying that he believes that mainland security personnel were definitely behind Mr. Lee's disappearance?
Well, one way or another, this is a very concerning development because what we are seeing, and it seems like it's now been semi-confirmed by the Global Times editorial yesterday, is that you have a situation where the mainland authorities now see it appropriate to use certain means to bring people into the mainland, into their legal system, for the purposes of their investigations. Now, one country, two systems surely dictates that, one, that this shouldn't happen, that mainland law shouldn't be enforced in Hong Kong, and in any event, standards of freedom of speech and the like are definitely different between here and the mainland, and things that may not be legal in the mainland are definitely legal here. And there are no suggestions that by selling these books, these individuals have breached Hong Kong law. So it is most concerning that this development is going on at a fairly sensitive time given what's been going on in Hong Kong in the last few years.
And what do you think of the reaction of the Hong Kong government so far?
Well, they've been mouthing platitudes about the importance of ensuring that it's only Hong Kong officials enforcing the law in Hong Kong and the like. But in terms of substantive actions, we really haven't seen them treat this with any great urgency. Now, it may be that with the other 4 individuals who've been taken away earlier, they may think, well, they were not taken away from Hong Kong, so that didn't really matter. But definitely with Mr. Lee, it seems like he was taken away from Hong Kong, and this is a matter that the government should be treating with utmost priority, because it is of most concern not only to the community in general, but I'm starting to hear concerns from some of my clients and the like, the business community, about what this means for their safety in terms of doing business in Hong Kong.
You're saying clients in the business community in Hong Kong are worried about these events?
Yeah, of course, because in fact, one of the things that we've seen, for example, since the stock market crash in Shanghai in the middle of last year, when they started making mass arrests of financial industry professionals, was that investment houses and the like have started actually to relocate back to Hong Kong. And now we see an incident like this, it will start making people think, is Hong Kong just as unsafe as Shanghai in that regard?
Well, definitely. If we look at the program run by the Hong Kong government to attract Chinese business people and Chinese talents, professionals to Hong Kong, quite a number of these people, particularly business people and accountants, professionals and so forth, they have applied to come to Hong Kong, not only to take advantage of Hong Kong's freer and more legalistic investment community, but they think that if they're in Hong Kong, they will be safe from the Chinese legal and judicial system. So what's happened to Mr. Li Bo shows that this is not true, that there are ways and means in which Chinese law officials could abduct or somehow make them disappear and then show up on the other side. So this could lead to an outflow of these valuable investor new immigrants who have newly arrived in Hong Kong, even though, of course, there have also been complaints that they have been driving up the real estate prices. But nonetheless, this is certainly a blow to Hong Kong's attempt to attract business people and talented professionals from China.
Willie Lam, you were saying earlier that your understanding was that this was an instruction from the Chinese leadership to target this Causeway Bay bookseller. What is your understanding? Does it go wider than this? Does it target other publishers in Hong Kong, or is it just this one bookseller?
Oh, definitely. I know for certain that the publishers of at least 2 other publishing houses which put out books about the political intrigue in China, they have been physically visited by state security personnel in their Hong Kong offices, and these state security people, in some instances, just intimidated them, into stopping publishing certain books, and in at least 2 instances.
Intimidated in what way? Would they make threats involving relatives or business on the mainland, or how would it work?
Well, threats about their personal safety, threats about personal safety of the publishers. But in 2 cases, the state security personnel offered to pay compensation because in one case, the sensitive book has already been printed in Hong Kong. So in that case, the state security agents offered to compensate this publisher 1 million Hong Kong dollars to cover the expenses of the books which already have been printed. And in that case, that publisher had no choice but to take the money, take the 1 million Hong Kong dollars. But the books are subsequently, the printed books are subsequently destroyed.
What you're describing is a rather concerted campaign, isn't it? You're talking about involvement, use of large sums of money, and several people, different people being visited, Willie Lam.
Yeah, definitely. So the fact that state security agents operating in Hong Kong is not new. This has been happening in the past 2-3 years.
But they will be operating in plain clothes, right? Then
in plain clothes, yes. But what is new is that they have been targeting publishers, yes, and they have been visiting the offices physically and then delivering threats physically. Of course, in some cases, it's both carrot and stick. They would offer to compensate with huge sums of money, for books which have already been printed.
And would the Hong Kong government be aware of such activities, or there's no reason for them to be aware?
Of course, particularly the CY Leung administration, I think they would rather not get involved with these because basically CY Leung just take orders from Beijing as is well understood. So such activities, I think, even if the police were aware of those, they would not take a proactive way to investigate them.
Okay. So, Willie, just after Mr. Lee's disappearance, will this fundamentally change the way we look at one country, 2 systems?
Yes, I'm afraid that particularly in the past 6-7 years, and this predated CY Leung's ascendancy to the CE's job, the leadership in China has, I think, a well thought out plan to dilute 2 systems, as they were saying, putting one country well above 2 systems. And this unfortunate development has been much exacerbated since Mr. Xi took power 3 years ago, because Xi Jinping is a super nationalist. He is very paranoid about Hong Kong posing a threat to China in the sense of ideas about Western freedom and so forth penetrating China. And you can understand then the nervousness about these book publishers, because most of the clients are mainland tourists coming to Hong Kong. So these mainland tourists subsequently bring the books back to China, and then electronic versions might appear on the Chinese internet, thereby posing a threat, at least to the image of the leaders. And of course, the book in question, published by Mr. Gui, which infuriated the Chinese so much, the book they knew were about to be published was a book called The Lovers of Xi Jinping, which of course would make a dent. It could hurt Xi Jinping's image at the same time that a gigantic personality cult campaign is in the offing in China to build up Xi as the second Mao Zedong, the Mao Zedong of the 21st century. So all this, I think, result in an undermining of the one country, 2 systems model.
Okay, you just heard Willie Lam, who's adjunct professor at the Centre for China Studies at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, talking about the disappearance of bookseller Li Bo. Mr. Lam, of course, saying it's his understanding that Li Bo was taken from Hong Kong with involvement of mainland security personnel. But we have other guests who have different opinions on this, and we will be continuing the discussion after the news. Among our other guests, Lawrence Ma, barrister and chairman of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation, Kevin Yam, member of the Progressive Lawyers Group, and we also hope to be joined after the news by Chris Young, broadcaster and founder of The Voice of Hong Kong. And later in the programme, we'll be looking at North Korea's latest nuclear test. Was it really a hydrogen bomb? Just a quick comment from one of our one of our regular commentators, Henry, on Facebook, saying he agrees with comments that one country, two systems does not mean Hong Kong can allow some people to do things that might hurt national security. And we'll go to more of those comments later after the news. The weather is mainly fine. Will be cool in the morning. A maximum temperature around 21 degrees, currently 17 degrees. We'll be back in 3 minutes to continue the discussion.
Last year. You're listening to the news on RTHK.
Welcome back to Backchat. I'm Danny Gittings, sitting in for Hugh Chiverton. Your co-host this morning is Ada Wong. We're discussing in the first part of the programme the disappearance of bookseller Li Bo, what has happened to him. Our guests in this segment of the discussion, Kevin Yam, member of the Progressive Lawyers Group, Lawrence Ma, barrister and chairman of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation, and we're also joined by Chris Young, broadcaster and founder of The Voice of Hong Kong. Do email us with your thoughts at backchat@rthk.hk, or you can go to our Facebook page and comment there, the Facebook page, Backchat on RTHK Radio 3. Several comments coming in from listeners, both on Facebook and in emails. Let's go through a selection of those. First of all, Henry, whose comments I abbreviated before the news. Henry referring to a series of editorials in the mainland newspaper, the Global Times, which are saying that mainland security officials would certainly be justified in investigating Li Bo. Henry says, I agree with the Global Times comment. One country, two systems does not mean Hong Kong can allow some people to do things that might hurt national security. National security is overriding, and two systems does not mean two de facto countries. While considerable freedom is allowed in Hong Kong, it does not give you freedom to subvert or generate instability to our motherland. One more comment, Li Bo must have known the implications of selling books critical of China. If he goes overboard, he should know the consequences. The Chinese saying, those who eat salted fish should know they need to face first afterwards, is applicable here. Also on our Facebook page, in a different vein, TC says, first, I want to give a shout out to those listeners who commented on the Backchat edition earlier this week, where we were also talking about this topic, and they commented denying that Mr. Li has been held by mainland Chinese authorities, with some even accusing others of groundless Chinese bashing. Common sense would suggest that if mainland Chinese authorities really have nothing to do with Mr. Li's disappearance, they would vehemently deny it. But the Global Times, a mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party, is justifying what was happening. Furthermore, the Chinese foreign minister didn't issue any denials when his British counterpart asked about the whereabouts of a British citizen missing in mainland China. There's a Chinese saying, don't drive too closely to Beijing, because your words today will contradict those of yesterday. I'm starting to wonder whether this entire abduction business has anything to do with Xi Jinping personally, for two reasons. One, if the alleged topic of the book in question about Xi Jinping's love history is to go public, it may bring personal embarrassment to him, but would do very little in bringing down his presidency. Two, given the abductions have become diplomatic issues, with a Swedish citizen abducted in Thailand and a British citizen in Hong Kong, Xi Jinping is receiving attention for all the wrong reasons. Think about who would benefit from an embarrassed Xi Jinping. A number of other comments from our listeners. Jaludin says Mr. Li's disappearance is novel because of its political overtones. However, it's not unusual for Hong Kong and People's Republic of China authorities to extrajudicially render individuals from one side to another. It happens. It happened recently as the Ming Pao choppers case. So that's the reference to the return of the two people who were caught in China who attacked Kevin Lau, the former editor of Ming Pao. There was no lawful process for them to be sent from Hong Kong to Hong Kong from the PRC, but they were kidnapped, held for many days, then pushed over the border at the behest of the Hong Kong police force. Likewise, it is not unusual for clandestine services from the PRC to operate in Hong Kong, tailing political enemies and intimidating them. We all remember last year when certain Hong Kong politicians were being followed by the PRC security services. This is where we are going. The outrage is healthy, and it will only get louder as the Central People's Government gets more and more brazen. A couple of other quick comments. Peter says, if Li Bo has been taken to the mainland involuntarily, then it's not just a case that there's a breach of one country, two systems. There may have been a kidnapping. This is a crime in Hong Kong as far as I know, and if there's evidence of this, it should be investigated just as any other serious crime. The Hong Kong authorities should be asked to respond to this directly. And finally, on a personal note, John says, this morning in the car on the way to school, my daughter asked me, Daddy, does this mean we cannot criticise the Communist Party? Very interesting comment coming from a teenager. What is ridiculous is the reaction from our government. It's very embarrassing to hear these comments about prostitution and the comment from Regina Ip about immigration law. That's it. Let's just face it. We are a small city in China. Thank you very much indeed to all our listeners.
Yes, let's go to Lawrence Ma now. Lawrence, thanks for waiting very patiently in the last segment. Now, so 2 questions. What else can the Hong Kong government do, do you think? And do you agree with the Global Times comments?
Maybe I can throw in some research that I've done. The Global Times actually said that the Li Bo actually published a book that targets the mainland, and massively concocted false content and maliciously attack and undermine existing national political system. Under the criminal law in China, Section 105, where a person defame or otherwise incite the subversion of national government or to overthrow the socialist system, is liable for imprisonment for 5 years. And Section 6.3 of also the Criminal Law Act is where the criminal act was conducted within jurisdiction, or that the consequences of the act takes effect within jurisdiction, then the offence is taken to have been committed within jurisdiction. So I think this is I was looking into what law was Mr. Li possibly be guilty of, and this is what I found out. So I think if he is to be dealt with, he will be dealt with under these sections. A word to other...
sorry, just one point, Lawrence. Of course, that law doesn't apply. It may be applicable in the mainland and in the mainland to events committed outside the mainland. It doesn't apply in Hong Kong, does it?
Oh, it doesn't apply to Hong Kong. No, it doesn't. Definitely doesn't apply in Hong Kong. But if Mr. Li was charged, he would be charged under this offence because of the consequences of his act of publishing takes effect within jurisdiction. That gives the mainland court a jurisdiction. And then, of course, if you're interested, I can also tell you Section 7, which says that where a Chinese citizen commits an offence outside jurisdiction, this law, criminal law, applies, but the maximum penalty is 3 years imprisonment.
So what you're basically saying is that under mainland law, they have every right to try him for what they consider to be crimes committed outside the mainland, including in Hong Kong. But there still remains the question of how he ends up there in the first place, doesn't there?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And as Ada asked you, does that mean you agree with the substance of the Global Times editorial on these matters, saying that China has every right to investigate people for what they call stirring up trouble?
Well, I would have thought that if you want to equate that sort of act to bounty hunters or bail enforcement agents in America, I would kind of wanting to think that they are probably taken by underground bounty hunters, for example. These sort of acts are very criminal in the mainland. So, I mean, if it is committed not internationally, but within a city of the country, the question is, how could you bring justice or enforce the mainland law to a person who has done this sort of acts outside jurisdiction? But if it is within the mainland, it is purely plainly guilty of an offence. OK,
let's bring in another guest who's joining us now, Chris Young, who is a broadcaster and founder of the website Voice of Hong Kong. Voice of Hong Kong is at vohk.hk. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Danny and Ada.
Now, just looking at your website, and you have a editorial there written by you, Global Times demystifies two-system shield in missing bookseller saga. What are the thoughts you're expressing there?
Well, I think the most alarming implication of the missing bookseller case is really that the Chinese authorities, based on the thinking reflected in the Global Times editorials, is that it doesn't matter where the activities or the action or behavior of people took place. What matters is the impact, the effect. If the Chinese authorities found that it makes an impact, in effect, on the mainland, like books being published and sold here, being circulated or being brought back to the mainland, and cause effects on its political system, smearing, so-called smearing their leaders and their systems, then the Chinese authorities have grounds, say, to take actions. To say what the Global Times has said, that circumvent the laws to arrange or to make it happen that Li Bo somehow returns to the mainland in its own ways. And I think that really contradicts sharply with the basic thinking of the one country, two systems. That in view of the differences between the two systems, the Chinese government allows and to a high extent tolerates a lot of activities, acts and deeds in Hong Kong, as long as they are lawful. They are lawful here, like publishing books, operate a bookshop, or like commemorate the June 4 event. But now that, to me, that kind of shield in the name of the two systems becomes a bit unclear and blurred, because as the Global Times has said, the so-called powerful organs in every part of the world and can do something to circumvent the law, so that people they want can coordinate the investigations on the mainland. And I think that's so blatant. That's so blatant. I think the whole thing so far happened is that it's so blatant.
Chris, what are the implications for the CY Leung administration here? I mean, what are the political ramifications? So some people say they're surprised that CY Leung spoke out at all on this, and he did, didn't he? Saying it would be unacceptable for mainland security personnel to operate in Hong Kong.
Well, I think that's a technical clarification, because as Global Times has said, the fact that so-called mainland security officers carrying out their duties on Hong Kong soil did not happen. Perhaps it's true, but somehow they have ways to make it happen, that the Li Bo somehow return to the mainland, and that's mysterious, but again very, very worrying, because those have power can act something, say, in the shadow of law, or in the so-called gray areas of laws, that to do something they want. So to me, that's more a technical clarification. But the whole thing, I think, put the CY Leung himself and the government in an extremely difficult and embarrassing situation. So far, it seems that they got nothing from their request for information. They don't even know, perhaps, where Li Bo is. Not to mention, say, talking to her, seeking more information from him. So it's just ridiculous for CY to say that Li Bo should come out and give them more information.
So, Chris, the government really has nothing substantive they can do, right? So perhaps they can treat this as a crime. Somebody was abducted from a warehouse. Should they really trace the route, or as Willie Lam said in the last segment?
Well, under the constitutional order, Hong Kong directly under the central government, I think they should go to the top level, because it's so fundamental and so perhaps damaging to the one country, two systems. So if it's an action of a local authorities, Shenzhen or Guangdong, they should talk to the central government, at least voicing out the concerns here, people, about the very alarming implications on one country system, not just and perhaps as a Chinese or the Global Times writer said, an ordinary, say, case of investigation relating to something unclear to us.
Kevin Yam from the Progressive Lawyers Group. What more do you think the Hong Kong government should be doing?
The Hong Kong government should be making as much noise as possible on behalf of the people of Hong Kong, both to the central authorities and publicly, And also, and it's not just the Hong Kong government. I think, the Legislative Council, we have seen pretty brazen attempts by certain legislators to try and explain away the situation.
Hang on, that was one legislator, and he has apologised. Now, you might take issues with the way he apologised, but nonetheless, it is one legislator who made those comments.
Well, there were also others like Priscilla Leung and Regina Ip who tried to give all sorts of sophistic justifications of what's been going on. So, whilst they haven't been quite as brazen as Mr. Ng, I mean, nonetheless, they were trying to justify what's been going on. And I think this is something that should be looked at both by the executive and the legislative branches of government in Hong Kong very closely. And that if anyone is found to have damaged one country two systems as a result of this, for example, what did the Hong Kong government know about all of this beforehand, and when did they know it, right? So those things, we should be seeking accountability.
Lawrence Ma, you began the programme by saying that you thought it was highly unlikely that mainland security personnel were involved in Li Bo's disappearance. Is that fair? And do you still, from what you've heard over the last 45 minutes...
yes, the word involved, I think the mainland security bureau is definitely behind the scene. But I mean, what I'm saying is...
Sorry, you think they're behind the scenes? They may be involved behind the scenes, but not openly abducting. Is that what you're saying?
No, yes, I agree. I mean, they wouldn't be sending police officers with their accreditation coming over border here and arrest somebody and take them to the mainland because it's too grave politically and legally. They would be prosecuted if found. So they wouldn't be doing it. I'm just suggesting that they might be bounty hunters as such, like the Bail Enforcement Agency in America, who they're people who do that for them. That's why the Global Times was saying there are ways to make them cooperate to go over the border. I think that's actually happened. But what I wanted to say is that the lesson to learn from this is probably we can express our right of speech in Hong Kong, but so long as our right does not encroach over and affect or taking consequences in the mainland, then we are safe. But if we have heavy-handedly doing things that has an effect on the mainland, they would not be soft-handed. They would exercise their jurisdiction, extraterritorial jurisdiction, and try to stop that. I think that's the lesson to be learned.
Yeah, Chris Young, as a senior media person in Hong Kong, do you agree with that?
No, sorry, I just can't agree with that. That's exactly why people are worried. Because, for instance, if I write an article, my article is being circulated on the mainland and makes an impact on the mainland. So I'm in trouble. If organizers of the June 4 rally, say, organize a rally and then a lot of mainlanders come here to attend the rally, and then they return to the mainland, and then they talk to the people, and that makes an impact. And so, if the Chinese authority have to trace what happened, why did it happen, then they might say it's legitimate for them to say take the organizers of the rally responsible for that impact on the mainland. I think that becomes so arbitrary and without clear, say, legal boundaries.
Okay, it's a very interesting discussion this morning. We'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much to our guests on discussion about the latest on the missing booksellers, particularly Li Bo, who vanished from Hong Kong last week. You just heard Chris Young, who is a broadcaster and founder of the Voice of Hong Kong website. Also before that, Lawrence Ma, who's the barrister and chairman of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation. Kevin Yam, member of the Progressive Lawyers Group. And earlier on, before the news, we were also hearing from Willie Lam, adjunct Professor at the Centre for China Studies, Chinese University of Hong Kong, and James To from the Democratic Party. I'll leave the final word on this topic to our listeners. A couple more emails and using very strong language, perhaps a reflection of concerns that at least some people do have about this issue. James saying, whatever the apologists say, China is not trusted by the majority of Hong Kong people, many of whom fled within recent memory from the suffering caused by the excesses of the Communist Party. Unfortunately, China's economic bubble has burst, partly as a result of falling demand, but more importantly because of the incompetence of recent leaders, particularly its present incumbent. The Communist Party is reverting to type and is ignoring its international responsibilities, whereas the South China Sea, human rights, currency manipulation, and nearer home the abduction of the booksellers. Adding to our woes is the mute response from our inept leaders. One party, two systems is more than just under threat. And finally, another very strongly worded comment from Tommy. Tommy saying, can Willie Lam give an indication of his source of his assertion, which was made before the news, that Li Bo was abducted by PRC security officials as ordered by the top levels of the Chinese Communist Party? C.Y. Leung and Carrie Lam have made a few weak comments. We all assume that C.Y. Leung is a closet communist and will do whatever he's told by the CCP. We've been given the impression that Carrie Lam and other ex-civil service ministers are decent people doing their best for Hong Kong and have to accommodate the views of the CCP for the overall benefit of Hong Kong. But when Hong Kong people are abducted by PRC forces contrary to law, how far is Carrie Lam prepared to go in support of the CCP? When would she resign? Would it be when Hong Kong people are killed in Hong Kong by PRC forces, perhaps? Okay, as I said, some very strongly worded comments there. And indeed, Tommy finishing off saying, lastly, will I be in trouble for writing to Backchat? No, Tommy, you won't. And please all do continue to. We've had comments on all shades of different opinions coming in today. Please do keep them coming. Moving on. North Korea yesterday conducted another nuclear test. It claims that this is a hydrogen bomb test, which, if true, would be a much more powerful form of nuclear weapon, although scientists are casting doubt on this. The test conducted in the face of opposition from China and pretty much all the international community. Now, joining us to discuss the motivations behind North Korea's nuclear test and what the likely repercussions will be, we have two experts on North Korea. We have Felix Patrikev, who is Associate Professor in Politics and International Studies at University of Adelaide, and close to home, Brian Bridges is an adjunct professor at the Department of Political Science at Lingnan University. Professor Patrikev, let's go to you first.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Well, why did Kim Jong do this? I mean, he knew what the reaction would be, wouldn't he? I mean,
yes, but he's very much of that personality that really tests the boundaries very strongly, and he did. About a month ago, actually announced that they were planning to perform a test of a hydrogen, a thermonuclear weapon. So it's not something that we didn't anticipate, but at the same time we know of Kim Jong-un that he is a very willful and a very volatile personality, and we should expect some very, very odd behavior from him, I think, in times to come.
And he doesn't care about the reaction, particularly from China. I mean, things had, after a cold period, relations have seemed to be warming slightly with China, and that will now presumably be set into reverse again.
Well, there was a little bit of an indication that things were not going quite right when, again, last month, a girl band was sent over to China by North Korea, and they were promptly withdrawn from their tour and returned home by the North Koreans, and that suggested that there was something amiss between North Korea and China. And China has really been at pains to actually indicate precisely how unhappy it's been with its friend North Korea, the only friend that North Korea has actually in the international system, I dare say.
And Professor, how much do we know about the level of nuclear power in North Korea? Is it really as strong as we think it is?
I think the estimates of about 12 nuclear weapons that they might have, and this one, the judgment is still out on this one. The jury is still out whether it was a genuine hydrogen bomb, whether it was a hydrogen bomb which has actually gone wrong, the hydrogen part not taken off, and certainly the seismic count suggests that it was actually smaller than the one in 2009, which was 5.2, I think.
Okay, Professor Brian Bridges from Lingnan University. What repercussions should we expect from this nuclear test? Professor Bridges? Okay, well, let me put that question to Professor Patrikev. I mean, we've seen these nuclear tests before, and every time we have one of these nuclear tests, there's condemnation and a few sanctions, but North Korea continues much as before. Do you expect the same again?
Absolutely the same again, but with one caveat, and that is that if it was genuinely an attempt to set off a hydrogen bomb...
we seem to have lost Professor Patrikev as well. Okay, we'll draw close to the discussion there, because we have some more comments from our listeners to bring in before the end of the show. My thanks to Professor Patrikev, who's the Associate Professor in Politics and International Studies at the University of Adelaide, who you just heard him there talking about the possible repercussions of North Korea's nuclear test. Let's close the programme today by returning to our main topic, which was the disappearance of the booksellers, because the emails from our listeners are continuing to come in, and we've got a couple more with contrasting points of view. JR says if Willie Lam, our guest earlier on this show, is correct in his assertion that there were high-level directions from within the Chinese leadership of taking Li Bo across from Hong Kong across the border, any serious consideration for HSBC to relocate its headquarters back to Hong Kong has certainly taken a huge step backwards. And we should also remember that one of our other guests, Kevin Yam, was saying that he was hearing expressions of concern from within the business community in Hong Kong about possible repercussions of these events. In a different tone, Sam says, maybe two systems, but after all, it is one country. What has taken place is not alarming and nothing new to the world as a whole. Hong Kong should not allow hidden hands to undermine the mother country or her leaders from within Hong Kong soil. There have been too many events taking place in Hong Kong to undermine the motherland. As for the Li Bo incident, if he was a British passport holder, he should be publishing books or material about the lovers of David Cameron, not about China leaders. Do not make a mountain of a molehill on the Li Bo issue. Li Bo was aware of what he was doing, and he needs to face the consequences. Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you to all our listeners who made comments today. Ada, your closing thoughts?
Well, I think this will have big ramifications on one country, two systems, and I think the story will continue.
It certainly will. I'm sure we'll be returning to this topic again. Thank you very much. Hugh will be back tomorrow in the hot seat. In fact, he's watching me from the control room right now. The weather forecast, it will be mainly fine, cool in the morning with a maximum temperature about 21 degrees, but currently 17 degrees, relative humidity 78%. We'll be back tomorrow.
When receiving calls that claim to be from banks, stay vigilant and don't give your personal information. Verify the caller's identity through the bank's hotline, listed on the websites of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Hong Kong Association of Banks, and individual banks. As banks don't accept intermediary referrals for personal loans or credit card applications, calls from intermediaries for these referrals are potentially fraudulent. Verify calls via bank hotlines. Stay vigilant.
The news at 9:31.
The UN Security Council has agreed to start work immediately on drawing up new sanctions against North Korea following its claim to have tested a hydrogen bomb. The Security Council president said further significant measures were needed. Legislators have resumed debate on controversial new copyright laws after making no progress at their meeting yesterday. They're debating whether to adjourn discussions on the proposed legislation. And the World Bank says there will be global economic growth this year, but has forecast it will be modest and held back by weakness in many emerging economies. I'll have the full stories at 10 o'clock.
The news is done and Backchat's through. And so it's time for the morning brew, yeah. Got special guests here in to speak, to maybe help you plan your week, yeah. They know just what is going on,